Jenna. She has a question about colic. Hello, Jenna.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Great. Well, you're here in Austin, Texas, I see.
I am. I'm actually a new volunteer at the ACA as well.
Wow.
I'm a baby atheist.
Oh, well, welcome, and thank you for your time and energy and so forth and helping out. Tell us what your concern is today.
Well, since becoming an atheist and deconverting about 6 months ago, the discovery that I can be very wrong about something that I've been convinced I was right about my entire life has definitely made some changes, and it's made a difference because I started listening to Parenting Beyond Belief when it just started a couple months ago, right? Like in November?
Yep.
Because that's about when I started coming to the ACA. And I started listening because I found out after listening to the first episode that I could use it to kind of re-parent myself. I'm not a parent yet. I am married and I want to have kids, and I've always wanted to be a mother. But I knew when I was a kid even that the way that I was being raised just wasn't right. I found some old journals and found that reading those journals, and one of them I was 11, and I finished one entry off with, I hope that one day I can get help. And now I have, and my life is changing, and it's amazing. And y'all are a huge part of that because I've learned how many things, what specifically was wrong about my childhood and what I can do to change it in the future and my child's life, future child's life in the future, you know? But what I realize is that when I think back, I don't have very many memories, and apparently that's a symptom of PTSD. But I don't have very many memories of being young, like before the age of 11. But what I do know is that when I was younger, my mom would always tell me that I was colicky and that I would just cry and cry and cry, and I was otherwise healthy. But when I think about the fact that I'm sorry, I'm going off really long, but I was born the middle of, so my mom had 7 children, and the first 5 of us were born within 7 years of each other. And I was in the middle of that.
Wow.
And when you think about how much time you can dedicate to all those newborn babies, someone's going to get left out. And I think I was that one because as I got older, I started lashing out. I was just very bad. I was lying all the time. I was selfish. I was told I was all these bad things. And I found out later, no, there's a reason I was doing those things.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Your emotional needs were not being met.
Right. And I wanted to bring it back to the colic thing. I was wondering, is it possible that I wasn't colicky? I just needed attention because I started doing research on colic, and what I found shows me that we don't really know that much about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just this umbrella term that we give to babies who cry and we don't know how to deal with it. So, yeah.
I was lactose intolerant, but it turns out I'm not lactose intolerant.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like they were just looking for the easy Band-Aid that they could not blame themselves. It's all on you, the baby. You know, it's your body that's the problem. But I definitely think that this was a lack of emotional needs problem. I mean, I certainly am not. I'm just based on what you're telling us. You know, babies all children need a ton of attention, and it's one of the most important basic emotional needs that children have. And you were probably crying out for what you needed. And it may have been other needs that were not being met. It may have been stimulate. You weren't getting enough stimulation. And it may have been even physical needs, you know, just hunger or sleepy, and you're having trouble going to sleep. You need, soothing so that you can go to sleep. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that babies cry, but mostly there's a reason, and that's a fundamental premise of this book is that, we look to stop a behavior that kids do, And we don't look at what is causing the behavior. And once we do that, if we see the tip of the iceberg, the behavior is just the tip of the iceberg, and you look beneath that, then you start to realize that how you can actually meet the need and solve the problem without, well, it sounds like your parents may have been just dismissing any, need at the core, and going for the easy answers, which is so common, especially among a certain subset of society and also a certain generation. It's just not how we were taught to do things. We have so much more information now. But yeah, I mean, from what you're saying, it really does not. It sounds like colic was an easy way to call that. But I would imagine that your instincts are right on the money.
Hey, Jenna, if I could share a personal story with you around the subject of colic. When my daughter was a baby, she never had, long bouts of crying like the, quote, colicky babies do. And then it was just one evening where she was crying just nonstop. And it really freaked me out. And I called the doctor's office. It was in the evening, so it was one of those paging things. And so the doctor called back, and he could hear her crying in the background. She's got colic. That was what the diagnosis was, without question.
Over the phone.
Over the phone. Didn't ask me any questions at all, really, about her history or anything like that. It was just like a really easy go-to for him. But I just read the book, The Happiest Baby on the Block, which really talks to the need for empathy, like Wendy was referring to earlier. And so I looked at Maxine, and I was feeling pretty distressed at that moment. And I just looked at her eyes, and I just said, I know, this is so terrible. I'm just filled with anxiety right now. I don't know what to do. And it's really hard. I mean, she quieted down immediately. I can't say it was because of my response to her, but I do think that all of these types of diagnoses that people put on children, terrible twos, meltdowns, all this stuff, and so much of it, I believe, is related to the need for empathy, the need just simply to see that someone else is hearing them and seeing them. It's very powerful, and I think it's really something a lot of parents don't understand, just how helpful it can be. Dale, what about you? What do you want to add?
Yeah, I'm right in line with what you're saying, both of you. Our middle child was the one. Our first and third were pretty calm. Erin was never colicky, but we basically just said needy. She was she would cry a lot when she was not being held. And even when she was being held, she would sort of squirm and fuss a lot more than the other two had done. And we never got to the point, I think, when it's really incessant, I think it's the sort of thing where parents need to be sure that they are giving each other a break if you've got two parents in the home, or finding somebody else to give you a break. We never got to that point. But we actually discovered at a certain point the specific way she was squirming. She was sort of doing this with her neck. We noticed that it was the way she would squirm a lot. And we started, Becca said, oh my gosh, it's the tag. It's the tag on her, onesie or whatever it was. And we started cutting all the tags out, and she went down to like 10% of the fussing and squirming that she did before. So that's an unusually tangible result. But I think it's exactly, what Wendy said about there being a reason there's just this tendency to just think, bad baby. Why are you?
I got one of those, like one of those high maintenance babies.
Yeah, exactly. You're just high maintenance. Well, there's a reason. There's going to be a cause, and what you need to do is get yourself as safely as possible to a place where you can discover that cause. And I say safely, meaning don't if you have, gosh, especially single parents with a baby who's really going through a difficult time. My hat's off to them. I just think that's one of the most emotionally challenging things that a human being can go through. But if you can say what is something, and just experiment with various causes and that sort of thing, but not fall into that trap of just thinking this is just a bad child. This is just a child who's trying to make me miserable. That's never the case, It's just a matter of avoiding the easy answer and trying to find, some that might be a little more difficult to ferret out.
The other easy answer that I see and I study religious authoritarian cultures and households is it's authoritarian parenting view. But what goes along with that is wanting to see all children as being identical in terms of how they should be behaving and feeling. And so if a child doesn't fit in to their model, their worldview of how children are based on their perception, then there are all kinds of religious justifications for that. So, for example, there are churches that will believe that a crying baby is the sign of the devil. There's just that Satan has just entered that child's body that day and is just causing havoc. So it's another way to kind of see some external problem that is outside of the actions of the parents. And it's just really a way to just distance the parent from his or her own responsibility. And what I really like, Jenna, is you thinking about these things before you have a child, before you were even thinking of having a child. And so much of what we've talked about over the last few months has been about just really giving thought to how one chooses to raise one's child. I mean, so many of the problems are when people just get into this conveyor belt type of parenting where they really don't think about the child's individual need, and instead they go with more of a cookie cutter approach. It's quite harmful.
Well, it's interesting when I think about so it's taught me, this show has taught me how to communicate with other people, not only just think about how to treat kids, because if you think about, everybody has this inner child, everybody has this need for a validation and, all of that. It's a human need, not just a child need. And when I am triggered from my PTSD, I will sometimes go into a panic attack type state. And my husband and I finally realized in that state, I am equivalent to a 3-year-old. I am not a logical, rational thinking person. I am all emotion, and I have a need, and I have to figure out how to meet that need. And when the last panic attack that I had, not a couple weeks ago, my husband literally just stopped talking, got up and gave me a hug and told me that he loved me and everything is going to be okay. And I came out of that panic attack within minutes. Rather than going into this dissociated state for the next couple days and then into a depression and then all these other things, all I needed was to hear that I'm loved and it's okay.
Mm-hmm. You needed empathy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Wendy, could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of the heart-centered approach?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one of the fundamental, the structure of the book that we wrote is based on 10 universal truths that apply to all children, whether you're being raised in a village in Africa or the inner city in New York or the suburbs of Chicago. It's all children. It's not demographic or socioeconomic or racial, it's just everybody. And there's a couple of the truths. And the idea, I should preface it by saying, the idea is if we acknowledge these truths and we honor them, we're gonna have a much better time in raising our kids. And where we get into trouble is when we deny or don't acknowledge, but deny one of these truths, or we work against the truth, because the truths are essentially how kids work. And they're things like all kids have certain emotional needs, and all kids have a certain temperament that they're born with, and all kids need limits on their behavior, and all kids model their caregivers. There's certain things that if we understand those and we know how to honor them with the tools in our toolboxes, then we're gonna be fine, and our kids we're gonna be working with who they are, and they're going to be able to grow up into the person that they were meant to be. And a couple of things that the caller said, the temperament was one of them that I wanted to bring up. You know, when we have, and you were saying, Janet, as well, you know, when we expect our child to be a certain way and they aren't that way, then it's like, oh, there's something off about them. But really, there's a lot of science into temperament right now, and you can, and if you know sort of what the markers are of different temperaments, you can identify your child on these scales, and you can identify yourself. And you can see that if you don't match up with your child, if you have a very sensitive child, which Dale's middle child was, and sensitive is not the right word, but if you have a very sensitive child, to tags and things in their environment, and you're not, then that's going to seem that it's going to be more difficult for you. So yeah, you are going to have a more difficult time. But it doesn't make the child difficult. The child is perfectly normal and perfectly awesome. They're just different. And then the other thing that I was going to say was one of the universal truths is that all children have a neurobiological response to stress. And that is what the caller is talking about as well, in terms of her brain is perceiving a stimulus as a fear-based, danger, and it's putting her into a fight or flight mode. And that's it's triggering, and it does that. And it happens all the time with children, especially young children. We call it out of the zone in the book. It's out of those, when you're out of the zone, you're basically have been thrown into fight or flight. And it can happen because you put the peanut butter wrong on the PB&J, if you're a little kid, and it can happen for any reason, and it happens to us too. And if we don't acknowledge when our kids are out of the zone, then we might try to logic them. Well, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be mad about the peanut butter. And I just go sit down, stop this madness. Where if they're out of their minds, they can't hear you. So you have to take steps to calm them, bring them back in the zone. Then you can teach whatever you want to teach. But in terms of all of these universal truths, and this is kind of the little aha moment for me in taking the class, is they're not just universal truths about children. They're universal truths about all of us. And so that is, I think, what the caller is really getting at is, raising your children. It is like acknowledging and realizing, this is what makes me who I am. And that's just a great thing about parenting a kid, is you get to learn more about yourself, I suppose, if you embrace it that way.
Jenna, one suggestion I have for you, I started a Facebook group years ago. It's called Child Friendly Faith, and it's a closed group, mostly of survivors of religious child abuse and neglect. People in there, some of them are parents, some are religious leaders, some are survivors, some are experts. But if you're looking for an online community that would have people that understand what you've been through, that's another place, I think, to go as a resource. And if others have resources that they can talk about for Jenna, please do. Anything else on your mind, Jenna, that you want to share with us or ask before we let you go?
No, y'all have been. I just wanted to thank y'all again. Y'all are amazing, and you're doing good things. And you're going to meet me eventually. I promise.
I hope so.
Good.
And please check back with us. Just let us know how things are going.